So I'm going to have you first of all introduce yourself and just tell briefly how you got involved. Okay?
You start.
Okay. Lynn, you want to start?
Sure. I'm Lynn Roper, and I graduated from college an activist, having been very involved in the anti-war movement, and immediately joined the League of Women Voters, where I found fabulous activists, politically inclined women. And so I knew those women, and one of whom, of course, was Helen Busalis. And I had been involved in political campaigns, and so when Helen was elected in 1976, I believe, as mayor, we were thrilled that our idea of a women's commission actually came to be born, and that's how I got involved initially.
Great.
I was on the initial one.
Okay.
I don't have a real clear recollection of how I got involved. It probably had something to do with the fact that I started my own business. But I think I came at this a little differently than some of the people, because the circle of my friends, we were all members of the Junior League, and getting involved, my perception and recollection is getting involved in the Women's Commission sort of set me apart from some of my friends because they couldn't figure out why I would be doing that. But since I had my own business, I think I felt, obliged to do something. And I think the reason I got involved was because of contacts with people like Donna Carnes and Lynn, and that's how, so I sort of slid into it in a more quiet way than just setting out to change the world.
Great. And both of you were on the first commission,
Yes.
which was the
Lincoln-Lancaster Commission.
I don't know if I was
Status
on
one.
I don't know if I was on the initial one.
Oh, okay.
But shortly thereafter.
Mhm.
Right. And the Lincoln-Lancaster Commission on the Status of Women was the name of it.
Yes.
From the very
It
beginning.
had an interlocal agreement between the city and the county, one of the early cooperative agreements from both the county and city government. That's because Jan Gauger was a county commissioner, and she was also part of our founding.
What I was really struck with, I think, from the beginning was the variety of women that were there that I had never had really an opportunity to get to know. And I was almost awed by them because they had come from all different places and doing all kinds of different things. And we all sort of got together and we all had this one purpose. And for me, it was a very huge growth experience.
There were many generations of women. I thought that was wonderful. Women that were much older and had had different life experiences, even in 1976, than I had, and I would have been on the younger end, but we had multiple generations of women, which brought a great deal of wisdom, sometimes patience, sometimes impatience.
One of the people that I remember is Pat Smith. She was just an awesome human being, and I was in awe of her. And she had a really conservative background. Am I right, Lynn?
Right, she was the National Republican chairwoman.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, but she was a barn burner. She was great. So it was fun to come together and come to meetings and come to the board meetings because it was just such there was so much energy on the board.
So what were some of the things that you were most actively involved in? I mean, I know the commission worked on a lot of committees. What kind of committees were you involved in? And because of the committees, what do you feel like you really contributed to the most?
Well, I was on the employment committee, and I suspect I was because I had started this business.
And what was your business?
Well, I had a consulting business with a very dear friend of mine, Sheila Griffin, and after we turned 40 and got out of the Junior League, we decided we wanted to start our own business, which was pretty groundbreaking at that time. And so we knew we wanted to be in the consulting business. And so I said, well, let's start a business. And she said, what do we do first? And I said, well, first we'll go to the printer and get some stationery with our names on it, and then we'll start our business. So that was part of it. But there was another question first.
It was human resource, how you got involved with that.
With that. We did some really we wanted to do some really interesting things. I know that there was a time on the employment committee where we really wanted every woman who was working to strike for a day. Do you remember that?
No.
You don't?
Sorry.
That was a discussion at one of the, committee meetings. We thought that would really show people if they just would not, so that women who were, had the world on their back, we could show people that commerce might stop for a pause for a moment. It never happened. But then there was the getting our names in the
In the telephone book.
directory.
Yes, women could not have their names in the phone book. We couldn't find each other just to call for a committee meeting because all phones were in the man's name only, and only the man's name could be in the phone book. And when we did have an interesting confrontation with the phone company, wrote a lot of letters, and took quite a bit of heat about it as being unnecessary, but a silly little thing. Women can't organize if they can't find each other, and of course this is very much before the internet, so the only way you found each other was telephone. And at that time, if you looked at any directory, the League of Women Voters directory, it would have not been my name, Lynn Roper, it would have been Mrs. Dana Roper. And that is, as silly as it sounds, that was one of the craziest things that we did, but one of the early things.
Well, it was pretty important. I mean, it sounds sort of minuscule, but to never have your name in the phone book, how would you like that now? That was not good.
Well, finding each other.
And find each other.
Like-minded people. I was involved with several things. I had just joined Merrill Lynch, and the reason I was given the opportunity was because a brave woman before me had filed the lawsuit years past. That's when they told her that they didn't hire women, and she won, and so they were out looking for women, and I knew I wanted to try this, and so I stand on the shoulders of many women, and she's one of them, and so I was always in a non-traditional business situation. And at that time in Lincoln, I was thinking, we knew one woman corporate attorney, there was one woman insurance agent, there was one woman accountant, one woman doctor. No, I don't think there were any family practice docs at that time.
Well, there were maybe a couple, but
rare.
Very rare.
And I think my husband graduated from law school in 1970, and I don't think there was a woman in his class. In terms of business, women were not in business in any significant way. I don't even think that you could have found 50 women in the College of Business Administration at the time. So you have to understand, this is Mad Men era. This is what women were not in any professional situation. And so we had lots and lots of issues. I mean, obviously, just getting an opportunity to apply for the job and being considered and being able, if hired, to have the opportunity to perform as competently or more so as our male counterparts, and having your contribution to the organization recognized, and being paid what you're worth, not what men thought you were worth. The 69-cent buttons we of course wore many, many times, and I mean the whole work environment totally different at that time. Also at that time, I had, my husband was going to law school, and we'd applied to buy a townhome and applied for a mortgage, and we had resources, quite a bit of resources considering for the down payment, but the loan company refused the mortgage because I was the sole breadwinner. He was in law school, and we had plenty of money, but I might become pregnant, and who would pay the mortgage? So we were denied the mortgage. As it turns out, looking back at that property, glad we didn't buy it, but it certainly was one of the very many beginnings of women not being able to have credit. You couldn't have a credit card at Miller & Payne in your own name. It would always be on the husband's name. So again, I couldn't sign at Lynn Roper if I had the credit card, let alone, of course, at that time you didn't have MasterCard and Visa. Bank cards were not available. They were only individual store cards. So credit.
I don't even know if they were even cards as much as they just
an
were
account.
an account.
Yeah, you didn't have a plastic card at all.
There were no plastic.
Equal Credit Opportunity Act passed in, I think, 73 or 75, just beginning to give women the opportunity to have credit and earn credit. That was huge. And I think professional women, I will go on to say that in 1976, we also started, several women on the commission, myself included, the Business and Professional Women's chapter called NOVA. BNPW, Business and Professional Women, is a long, wonderful organization. We just started a separate chapter in Lincoln with, quote, younger women, I mentioned, because there really were none.
Sorry, could you start with, we started a chapter?
Yeah, we started a chapter of Business and Professional Women. There were several in town, but none that had the professions that I was just discussing, accountant, etc. And we called it NOVA after the new star. And NOVA BNPW is celebrating its almost 40th year, still being a very good, strong group for professional women in Lincoln, business and professional women. Opportunity to learn from each other, support each other, teach each other, all of that. And that was an offshoot of the Commission on the Status of Women, 1976.
I also recall around that time I was on the United Way board, and I ended up being the first female president of United Way. But I don't think it was necessarily, I didn't ever feel like it was necessarily because, oh, we have to have a woman finally. It was even a little bit before, when people, it was, I don't know, I was just on the board and must have done a fair job. So I did have that opportunity, and now they've had several female presidents of United Way. So there were a number of things that we did that nobody had ever done before.
I was on the YMCA board, Young Men's Christian Association board, because I wanted to swim in their pool, which was a better pool than the YWCA. And at noontime, I wanted to go over there and swim. And we didn't have a women's locker room. And so I joined the board, and we did our ribbon cutting. Helen came for the ribbon cutting, and the governor's wife, Ruth Thone, at the time. I have those pictures. Actually, I have the scissors still in my office. But we did get a women's fitness center. And in advocating to the male board why they should be doing this, when of course their response is, why don't you go to the YW? I made a good business case for their facilities were better, surprised the men's facilities were better, and that they would gain so much in membership, how many new members they would gain, how much revenue this would bring in. And it worked. And we were able to get 4 women on the board, Christy Schroff, Schwarzkopf at the time, and of course Judy, and women used the facilities there, and we had our own locker room, and that was in October of 1979, I think. But it's hard to believe that, yes, the women were not allowed, and I love the pool. It's always fun.
Do you want to talk about the Lazy Banker bill? Were you involved in that?
Actually, Donna Carnes was the primary chair of our legislative committee, and this is about, and the farm women were really hugely helpful in explaining to us that their husbands could go into the bank, sign a loan on property that they were joint tenant, and not with any knowledge on their part. And then if they were not able to pay back the loan, the farm was lost and the woman didn't even know there was a debt on it. And the current mayor was on the other side of this issue, and pretty much said, it's too much work for the wife to come into town and sign it, and that's why it's called the Lazy Banker's Bill. Why would you want to get the property owner to sign it when the man is here? And he could, at that time, indenture a woman's property. And the fight was amazing, and because of the farm women in Nebraska, who were very well organized, we were the advocates, and we were there in the legislature, but their statewide network really brought tremendous pressure on local representatives, more so than we could have done just in Lincoln. So it was really our leadership and a statewide effort by farm women, and that has now, and that changed. And no, you can't indenture property that is only half yours and your wife owns the other half. So both parties have to sign. And so if you get a mortgage today, both of you will sign, not just one.
It's a wonder we didn't grind our teeth down to our gums.
You still have all your teeth. Do you want to talk a little bit about Title IX then?
Absolutely. Title IX is huge change in people's lives, and at the beginning it was uncharted territory, and all that anybody that was going to have to implement it could see was money, money, money. I totally remember, I was chair of the Title IX committee, going to see the superintendent of schools at that time, John Prosh, a very fine leader, but Iowa farm background. Fortunately, they had women's basketball over there because he at least could visualize this, but was really flummoxed about when we said, how are we going to implement this? Well, we'll give it to the cultural diversity staff person, and of course we said, this isn't about cultural diversity. Let us help you learn what this is about. And it was a terrific effort and very difficult because the resources needed. And it began, I mean, young women today that enjoy athletics in the high school area, competitive athletics, have no idea. What did eventually occur and did happen was that athletic fathers had little girls and they began dreaming of them being athletes. And the parents' support then moved the school district further than it would have gone otherwise. But most certainly, women, I mean, the girls didn't have practice times in a gym, they didn't have uniforms, they didn't have paid coaches, it was volunteer, and it took a long time for it to become even recognized. I do fully remember the girls' first state high school championship at Bob Devaney, and it Lincoln East, wonderful, wonderful young team. First time, I mean, now they would look like third graders. Their skill level was so poor, but it was the first time a girls' high school basketball championship had been in Nebraska. And I went and I cried. I was so happy for those girls, and I think you can hear me cry now. The lesson that we were trying to teach was that all the things that athletics taught men, teamwork, competitiveness, how to get back up when you've been knocked down, self-esteem, self-assurance, all those wonderful things would be taught these young women. And maybe then we wouldn't have as many abused women as we do. I don't know that there's a direct corollary, but we have seen, and there's now, of course, 40 years later, 50 years. Title IX is 40 years old now. Lots of studies about the impact of participation in athletics for young women. In high school, I mean, clearly they don't get pregnant, they stay in school, they have all kinds of opportunities. So opening that door to athletics, obviously there's some negatives out there as well, but opening that door for women has offered young women tremendous development and, I hope, preparation for the rest of life as well. So athletics was much more than just being able to dribble the ball. It did so much more for young women. Athletics, I was involved in.
Sorry, can you start with the other thing?
Yeah. Another thing about athletics at the college level that I was involved with, again, Bob Devaney was the athletic director, and we were going to try and have competitive athletics. There were teams, but there was not NC2A and not, they were what were called club teams. They didn't have full funding, they didn't have scholarships. So there was women's basketball barely, but not in the equal manner at all. As that began to develop, we just barely got it started, and a group of friends and I started another organization called Boost Hers, H-E-R-S, Boost Hers, or athletic boosters. And I'm happy to say that supported women's basketball at the university, and it's still alive and well and thriving today. But you needed a fan base, you needed a support group, and at the beginning, of course, the games were at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Who can go to a game? And there were, 30 people there. But we eventually got people interested in women's basketball. And volleyball then became very prominent thanks to the early leadership of Coach Terry Pettit. But women's athletics at Nebraska pretty much concentrated early on basketball and volleyball. Now they have a full level of sports and very good funding, But in 1976, late 70s, we were trying to entice people with free pizza and Cokes that we would pay for, and everything we could do to get support for the program and the young women.
I think at that time, even beyond what the commission did, it was a time where a lot of other really important things were happening. Attention to violence against women, we had a committee like that within it. Bob Carey then appointed a committee and we studied that. I was a co-chair with Karen
Dunny?
O'Tear.
Can't remember.
And so there was those issues that were not with the commission, but I think it grew out of that movement at that time. Same goes for women business owners.
Right.
They had a big conference around that time that Bob Carey was very supportive of for women business owners. So I didn't realize when I'm sitting here reflecting how many things we did that are almost taken for granted now. My daughter owns her own business, but she never belonged to the Commission on the Status of Women. A lot of really wonderful things happen, and I don't think a lot of young women really probably do really understand. Maybe that's our fault because we haven't, told them enough history, or I don't know.
Well, those doors were solidly closed. In addition, when I went to college, as a female, you either were going to be a teacher or a nurse.
Or get married. You were a teacher or a nurse, and then you'd get married. Or you'd get married right out of college, or you'd be the teacher or the nurse. That was it.
No other avenue available, and no role model, and certainly you wouldn't think of that. And I knew I couldn't do either of those.
I know when Sheila and I got out of the junior league and we announced our friends, I mentioned previously that we were going to start our own business, some people thought we were nuts. What do you mean you're going to start your own business? But I guess we just felt like there was a reason for doing that, and I'm glad I was part of it. A little bit. Kind of bit.
What about in the area of human or in reproductive rights? Were either of you in some of the things that were going on in trying to get women's health centers and?
Oh, absolutely. I was on the board of Lincoln General, and we tried to get a women's health clinic. We got it open, but
remember that?
Yes. Oh, wow. And that was a battle. Oh my gosh.
Having mammograms.
Yes, and
really?
oh yeah, and having staffing and understanding. And we were able to maintain it for 3 years, but it closed because of funding, and it was but we fought hard for it, and we fought about it afterwards. But absolutely, we were fortunate in that we had Planned Parenthood beginning at that same time, and so we had a resource for women needed to be supported, and we were, obviously wanting health care for all women and many women who couldn't afford it. And that is still the case today, 40 years later. Quality health care absolutely is. But yes, I've marched in Lincoln and in Washington
Really?
for that. Oh yeah.
Good. Tell us a little bit about that. What about the march in Lincoln?
This was at the time the commission was doing all of its work we became identified in a negative way that this was our issue, that we were pro-choice. And so those who did not share that belief went to the city council to defund us, to get rid of us. And it was, I think Helen was actually still mayor then. I mean, it was early on, I do recall that. Mm-hmm. And I do recall we tried and we marshaled the ministers of the community to say that the work we were doing in all phases was critical, and that we were not, that was the advocacy for women's right to choose abortion or not was not our primary mission by any means, but it was the law of the land. And as so many other laws, whether it was equal credit or Title IX, needed to be enforced. But we weathered that storm. And of course it is always an issue. The other issue, which was quite controversial at that time, seems unusual now, was the lesbian and gay women who very much, I mean, their issues indeed were the same, and even to a greater degree. We wanted to advocate for them, but yet we really didn't know their issues, and oftentimes too the folks looking at the Commission on Women thought that it was only about gay and lesbian women. Why would you need, you know, and so the perception, mm-hmm. the stereotypes were really strong, and were not easily changed. And it was a learning experience for us on the Commission, mm-hmm. as to how do we interact. And there's anger, a lot of anger on both sides and within the women's community about the agenda. You know, you have your agenda, no, we have our agenda, no, we need to have this agenda together. But that was difficult, and so that was also a part of the time.
And now, then when you went to Washington?
Oh, I marched for the ERA, and I marched, I don't know when that was. We had a Equal Rights Amendment. We should talk about Shirley Marsh and the ERA in Nebraska. That was in the 70s, wasn't it? 80s? Mm-hmm. And the Equal Rights Amendment, of course, had been passed and then rescinded. Mm-hmm. And so each state, we were trying to pass it again. Shirley Marsh, which was the Lincoln's state senator, and put it into the state legislature. It did not pass. And, surprise. Right, and again, at the time, these uppity women were just asking for way too much. First you give them the vote, you know, then they can own property, they can drive a car.
And they get their names in the phone book.
Right,
I mean,
what next?
What a disaster.
Right. So, Equal Rights Amendment, and that, of course, was a national movement. And an attempt, we had a contingent from Nebraska. Virginia Walsh was there in the front row. And we went and visited with our representative, Charlie Thone, at the time, soliciting his vote for the Equal Rights Amendment. And the women all dressed in white. I have great pictures, just like the suffragists. Gosh, I should remember the date. But we, Jane was still in, it's got to be the early 80s, I think, when we did that.
We went
It was
twice.
A wonderful march, yeah, we did. And then,
Second time, what was that for?
well, I marched again for Voters for Choice for Planned Parenthood in, what year is it? Maybe in the late 90s? Maybe in the late 90s?
It was not all that long ago, actually.
Yeah. But yeah.
Late 90s probably, or mid 90s maybe.
We can look it up.
Yeah, I need to look it up, I can't remember.
That's okay.
But yes, a whole group of women, and the Commission organized the first one, the ERA one, and we had, we probably had 40 or 50 women from Nebraska. Every state sent a contingent. Yeah. And interesting too, throughout this time, Lincoln and Lancaster County Commission on the Status of Women was extremely strong and active. There was a state commission, not nearly as active, and there was no commission in Omaha. And there never has been a commission in Omaha. And that is, you could write a whole history about why that is. But there never has been an advocacy group, one that was trying to get legislation and and advocate. Now they have a women's foundation, very strong group, different mission, totally different mission. But anybody who was worrying about trying to get child care or after school child care programs going, or certainly implement Title IX, they did not have that voice in Douglas County.
It's interesting.
It was, some of the things that we did or were a part of were not always comfortable for us even personally.
Absolutely.
Because there go those women doing those kinds of things. And you were often having to explain yourself to people who didn't understand or didn't want to understand. But maybe it's just part of us. I don't know what makes women do this except knowing that we need to do those kinds of things.
Well, one-on-one women are always supporting each other. At this level, this was obviously attempting to support and I can tell you the number, 176,000 women in Lincoln and Lancaster County, because that's how many women in the census of 1970 we had. And to improve their lives, whether it's opportunities to work at all, opportunities, to be safe from an abusive spouse, to have a rape charge actually taken seriously, evidence gathered, and prosecution. Commission did a lot of work with the police department. We had the power of the mayor behind us, Helen Busalis, and that there was great strides. There were great strides made in the first 5 years, I'd say, of our existence in terms of policemen being educated when a rape call came in and knowing what to do, how to gather the evidence. All of the emergency room people, we trained them. We had a wonderful group of professionals that knew how to do that. And then prosecutors to prosecute. And that was a huge, huge step forward in women and safety. Now the next, it obviously continues today, but domestic violence, there was no place to go. Women would run to a minister maybe. There was no one to tell, and it was such a stigma. Right, yeah. It was such a stigma. It was so accepted that that's just the way your life is. At all socioeconomic levels, I think what surprised us was abuse existed at higher income levels. We always think of it in a poverty-stricken, and learning the scope of the abuse in the community and having the first hotline where you could at least offer some guidance, but then you have no services to help those women. There have been some great social services that started, but also got much, much stronger. Friendship Home, and then churches who were maybe doing something like St. Monica's, but hadn't really stepped up, really tried to step up a great deal more and shine light on the problem and the needs, and come up with some solutions and support those solutions. A long 40-year process still is. But boy, it all began then. There was no place to go. And nobody to call, my heaven's sakes, no. And not as strong at all as it is now. The problem is still there, but the resources are greater, and they're still not as enough, most certainly. Everybody's expanding. That's unfortunately a growing business, but it is an identified and recognizable problem in the community, and it wasn't even considered a problem.
Yeah. What would you say to young women today? What would you like them to know about that time and what you think the situation is now, and maybe advice you would give them, or any kinds of words of wisdom you'd like to share?
I think it would have to be a very different approach than when we started out. We started bare bones.
Well, what I think Kathy's asking though is to reflecting on where we've been. If this was a 16-year-old girl sitting there.
Well, if they'd sit there long enough to listen.
And not text you.
And get right like this. Maybe if we text them, they might read it. But I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
What do you see as the situation for women today? Looking at how far we've come, but still so many things that still we still have lots of work to do?
Well, very, very important women in high places are still writing books about how you should behave in the workforce, and you know, I think it's still there to some degree.
Oh, yes. I mean, first of all, what I would tell young women is know your history. Learn your history. I am a big history buff.
Yeah.
But I always say, I stand on the shoulders of women who made a lot of tough decisions and sacrifices so I could have the opportunities I have today. And I get to choose I get to choose what career I want. And you know, I have to prepare myself for it. I get to choose what I want to do with my body. I get to choose where the money that I have, whether I want my husband to have it or not. There's a lot of choices I have because a lot of women made really tough decisions and sacrificed a lot. So the history, in addition to, of course, I will scream loudly about the vote. Any woman who doesn't vote ought to be sent to Afghanistan for 5 years and see how women are treated there. Yeah, but they need to know their history and then respect that history and understand that the freedoms that you have now, you take for granted. You have got to stop taking them for granted. There are people who do not believe women should be educated, and I just named the country that says women do not need to be educated. And those attitudes in the United States, sure they are. We're a melting pot. We welcome all attitudes, but not all attitudes are positive toward the development of the full potential of women and their role in the world. We do hold up half the sky, and that's recognized some places. Then, of course, politically, that has been very interesting. We still don't have a woman president. We had a vice presidential candidate, Geraldine Ferraro. We may be closer than we've ever been.
I remember that night. She wore a white suit.
I do too. Yeah.
I think somebody from the commission came to my house that night, and we sat and watched and cried.
Oh, of course.
And cried in the living room.
Absolutely.
Seeing this woman up there, it was just like a miracle. And remember when Gloria Steinem came?
Yes. Oh, yes. We should say that, Kathy. Anna had dinner with Gloria Steinem here in Lincoln.
It was a business conference, wasn't it? It was something to do with that. And anyway, first we got to choose some women who could go to dinner with her, and there was only about 10 women around the table. And the thing I remember most about her is that she was so engaging, and she went around the room and asked each one of us to tell our stories. She wanted to hear about us. It was pretty exciting.
Regrettably, there are women leaders who do not feel the role of women is as broad as we would characterize it, and feel that the role of women is defined either through religion or historical roles, I guess is the way I would say it, and do not see the modern woman, young woman today, as needing to have the kind of environment that we would advocate, and not feeling that some of the issues we think are so very, very important, child care for everyone, you know, the ability to live free from violence is as critical. And so there will always be that, if you will, thread, I would call it, but certainly the assumption that the opportunities young women have today and their mothers have, and the environment in which their fathers and teachers treat them is a product of a lot of other struggles and a lot of education, and it can go away. I think the quote war on women that we saw a little bit in the last presidential campaign should be a real warning. And I'm glad to say that I do think some young women did wake up and say, whoa, you mean my way of life is considered unnecessary, and the choices I have aren't considered to be important. It can be taken away, but they can.
Struggle every day.
Great. Do you have any last minute things you want to share?
Not until about 9:30 when I'm saying, I should have said.
I remember.
I should have said.
I don't know. We should maybe. I don't don't know if young women really, all young women or majority women really understand some of these things, but you can't make them know about it.
No, you have to share your
Just
history
with them.
and give them the books, which I do, to
Yeah.
read the history and talk about the history. And of course, it'd be wonderful, and you do see in some, modern entertainment, you're going to get some of the history, right or wrong. But learn about Eleanor Roosevelt, and read and learn what life was like for women.
Well, and that's what we're trying to do with this video. We really want to be able to share these stories so that people really understand where we were and where we've come from, and that sliding backwards would just be a travesty to those women like you who fought so hard to get where we are.
I think even on a personal note, the little bit that I was involved, it was an enriching, it made me a richer person to be part of that, to know those women, to know women I would have never have had any
Right.
contact with before. It just was like opening the doors and letting the fresh air in. It was wonderful. And being able to look at this book here and see those names, and then the memories fled back. So it was a wonderful experience. I hope young women today can look back sometime like we are, like I am, and say, oh, that was really great.
Well, and we had passion for the mission,
Yeah.
and learning how to strategize, learning the political process, learning when to compromise and how to accomplish anything in a political arena. But then, sometimes you're, just trying to get childcare or trying to get an employer to understand why, why you need to have family-friendly policies, that you'll have a better employee. They're not, taking advantage of you. You're going to have a happier, more productive employee if the mom can take care of that sick kid once in a while. So the learning all of those things, fabulous.
Great.
We thank you for
Sure, letting us
giving us
battle.
that,
Well, no, it was fantastic. It's wonderful. I just love it. Doris Herndon, who is the Director of Women's Studies at Wesleyan, she is an Alice Paul winner, but she also is on the commission right now, and she is involved in this project. And she will be sorry to have missed hearing you, because she really loves to sit and listen to the interviews, because to her this is such, it's golden, everything is golden for her, and she's really going to be able to use a lot of the things that she hears and stuff when she's talking in her classes.
Say her name carefully again.
Doris Herndon, Dr. Doris Herndon,
How do you spell that?
GSE,
Okay, Doris.
and then Herndon is HERNDON.
Like Henry Dunn, but Herndon.
Yeah, and she is, we're kind of using her as the lead historian and lead scholar on this project. And we have applied for a grant from the Nebraska Humanities Council.
Sure.
And,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Well,
to do.
that's interesting. I
Yeah.
just came off the board.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go. Well, because this is a
Wait,
history.
have you submitted it yet?
Yes, we have submitted it. Doris did a lot of work with it.
Okay, tell me what it is again, and I'll make a phone call.
It's the Women's History Project, and we are doing it through the Lincoln-Lancaster Women's Commission, but it's mostly the Women's Foundation, because most of the work we do now has to be through the foundation and not the
And
commission.
it's and what are you asking for?
I think she asked for $1,500 to do a mini grant. The mini grant is to do the work on this, putting the DVDs together. It's actually to be able to pay for the editing and the resources to do some history working and getting some of these articles you were talking about and some of these other things together, and then piecing it together to put it actually into a video that we can circulate and send out to people and do kind of a speakers bureau and go and talk to groups. but also because I think we'd really like to be able to make it available to the schools, anyone like that.
Yeah.
And so Jerese is sort of taking the lead on doing that part of it because, you know, having been, she is a scholar and a historian, so she's kind of the lead person, but she really enjoys hearing
Well, that
it.
was it for the mini grant series?
Yes,
Yeah, for the mini
yes,
grants.
the mini grants,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Okay.
They do have the media grants, which, you know, are quite a bit more substantial,
Yeah.
but right now, we
You
just
just
feel like
want
the
a
mini
mini
grant
grant.
is what we're really hoping
Okay.
for. So, and I really think that with this raw footage that Natalia's putting together for us, and then when we could get some of these other things, like the grant that we applied for is a lot of the editing cost.
Yeah.
Because it takes a long time to edit things and put it all together, and we will go back and look at those articles you were talking about and try to incorporate a lot of different things
I'm
into
glad
it.
to know that piece of information. I'll
Yeah.
make a phone call.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
we're
I'm
excited
just
about that.
because I make a phone call doesn't mean it's
No,
gonna happen.
but that would be great because we haven't heard yet if we got it
Yeah.
accepted, but I think, again, if we go through the Humanities Council, there's another outlet for us to disseminate the
Oh
information.
my gosh, yes,
So
that's a
that's,
perfect point.
We
Yeah.
love the humanities.
We're all
Now we're humanities
very
Nebraska.
big
We've
supporters
changed
of
our
right,
names,
humanities.
yes,
and,
that's right, I keep forgetting
That's
to say
okay.
that.
You'll come.
It's like trying to get the Women's Foundation, for people to know the Women's
Yeah.
Foundation. I constantly am pushing that name out
That's
there.
good though.
Yeah, that's good.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Well, we really appreciate the
Oh,
chance.
thank you.
Sure.
This has been
We'd be glad
fantastic.
to come back and talk another 2 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if we need more, we